David. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at what to do when your trains won't run, why they may not run, and also how to fix them. There are tons of different reasons why your trains might not run. This video, we're going to be looking at some of the more common ones, and we're going to be showing how to kind of fix those issues, as well as how to keep your trains running for a long time. The first reason your engines might not run might not have anything to do with the engines themselves. Instead, you should check your transformers and track. Check to make sure that the wires that actually go to the track from the transformer are both connected to the right poles, and also are both connected still. I've had issues where the wires connected to the track have come out of place, and I've wondered why my things won't run. Well, because they're not getting any power. Also, make sure that your transformers are working. The best way to test that your track and power is still working correctly is to test another locomotive that you know works. If that engine doesn't work, then it's likely an issue with your transformers. If that engine does work, then you know it's an issue isolated to that locomotive. The issue I've encountered is that if you have these Lionel power packs on your layout, these are like the 40-volt ones that come from the starter sets. If you have these on your layout attached to your track and you attempt to use a transformer-operated locomotive, it will not run. I'm not exactly sure what the reason for that is, but all you have to do is you have to unplug it from the track and your transformer locomotive will likely run again. The reason your trains might not run well or run at all is due to having dirty track. Track will get dirty over time due to use and due to just kind of sitting and collecting dust and stuff. So from time to time, you'll have to clean your track. Now, let me show you how I like to clean my track. The most cost-effective way I've found to clean your track is to get isopropyl alcohol from the dollar store. I recommend using at least 70% strength like I have here. And basically all you do is you grab a paper towel, you put a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on it, and just scrub out the rails for a minute. You can see all that dirt and grease on there. That's going to prevent your locomotives from picking up electricity perfectly. Now, this actually isn't all too bad because I cleaned my tracks not that long ago. But you can see, like, if you let these tracks sit for a while, they can get really dirty. I mean, it picked up a little bit there. It's good to do this regularly if you notice your engines might be running a bit sluggish or maybe slowing down at parts of the layout. Check your track. It might be having issues conducting electricity due to all the dirt and grime on it. Another thing to check is your track work. Make sure that the rails and the pins are all connected tightly. As you can see here in the siding, it's kind of separated a little bit. Now, I can't actually move that at all because it's butted up against the mountain. But what I recommend when you're setting up, especially this fast track, if it's not permanent, you should go around with a pair of pliers and make sure that all of the joints are tight, because they can come loose over time, and that can also cause your conductivity of the rails to go down. Another thing about Lionel Fast Track is that over time, the conductivity of the track will decrease because it uses steel rails to work with Lionel magnet traction, and the steel is kind of vulnerable to being corroded over time, especially if you have it in like a dampened basement. And so you have to be careful of that. Make sure that you're not allowing excess moisture on the track. Like for me, you can see around my trains, I have these little damper buckets here. These collect moisture from the air that kind of prevents everything from being corroded. That's another thing to keep note of, because sometimes if you let it sit for a while, it'll get corroded. You'll notice it goes from like a shiny silver color to kind of a dull gray, and your trains won't run as well. Now let's take a look at why a locomotive might not run and some basic locomotive maintenance to keep them running well. With your track, another reason an engine might be running poorly is due to having dirty wheels or dirty pickups. Make sure that you clean these regularly with large amounts of use, or when you get a new locomotive, as they'll get incredibly dirty over time, and that'll affect its ability to pick up current. You should clean the surfaces of wheels. You can even clean the flanges if you want to, though. It's not entirely super necessary, but make sure that they're nice and clean. As you can see, they're relatively clean. Over time, though, they'll get kind of like a dark gray. They won't be as shiny as you'll see. And also make sure you clean these rollers, because these rollers are what actually pick up the actual live current, and so you're going to want to make sure that those are getting as much current as possible so that your locomotives run well. Now, another reason an engine might not be running well is actually due to these gears up here. One thing I've noticed is that sometimes these traction tires will actually come off, and if they come off, they might get kind of roped into these gears here and kind of bind up. That's something to be aware of. It happened to my Canadian Pacific F3. Completely destroyed the traction tires and almost completely seized up the engine, but thankfully I was able to get it out before the motor burned out. Another thing to check for is a lot of these engines were ran on carpets back in the day with that open tubular track, and so there's often lots of fibers and pet hairs and all this nasty crap up in these gears, and that'll cause them to bind up. So make sure you clean those out. If you notice any kind of sluggish movement from a locomotive, that might be why. Another thing is due to lubrication. Not enough lubrication, as well as kind of old grease that is hardened, can cause these wheels to bind up again. So make sure that your engines are properly lubricated, and also make sure that they have fresh lubrication, because it'll dry up over time and that can cause your engines to seize up and your motors to burn out. Now, what I like to use to keep these engines nice and well lubricated is, for gears and heavier kind of applications, I like to use this kind of heavier grease. Now, this is a Lionel. This came with an old service kit, but you can use any sort of heavy grease. And then for lighter axles and lighter gears and stuff, and most applications, I like this Label 107. You can find this pretty much anywhere, so it's nice. It's got a fine tip for small axles, and I like them for getting into the little axles on these rollers here. Basically, anything that moves, you should probably put a little bit of grease on it. Now let's take a look at some of the stuff that might go wrong on the inside of an engine. The first reason might be as simple as a broken wire. Some areas to look for include the motor around the brushes. These little metal wires here, these break super easily. So be careful when you're removing the brush plate of the motor, as those often, or those won't often I would say, but can easily snap off. I've had that happen in my Berkshire, and you'll have to resolder them. Now, soldering wires is not a big deal. In fact, if you're going to be in this hobby, it's probably a skill that you should develop because you're going to have to, or you're going to have someone else do it. But it's something that can happen if you're working on an engine, then the wires might break, or you might have an engine with a broken wire. It's very common, and it's kind of a simple fix. You know, sometimes the engine might not run. It might be as simple as resoldering a wire. So it's one thing to look for. If you find an engine not running well, there are some things you can do to service the motor. First of all is to make sure that the commutator face as well as the brushes are clean, so that way that the commutator gets plenty of power and can actually move freely, and also make sure that they're free of grease or grime so that it doesn't burn up with any heat or friction, because this is a high area of friction. These brushes here, they rub on the commutator face, and since there's a current there and stuff, you don't want any areas where they can burn up and stuff. Typically that's how a motor might burn up. Make sure that these springs and everything are putting enough pressure though. Make sure that they're not out or interfering or contacting anything else. You should also clean up in between the actual poles of the commutator. I'll include a picture of a commutator face so you know what I'm talking about. I don't want to take this one open right now because these brushes can be a bit finicky to get back in. But basically it comes down to make sure everything's clean. Really, when it comes to model train maintenance, it really comes down to a few things. Make sure make sure that nothing's shorting, make sure the wires are all good, and make sure everything's clean. It's really about that simple. Lionel E-unit is kind of a finicky thing, and it's an area of issue on a lot of different Lionel locomotives. There kind of is a lot of stuff going on with them. Basically, the way it works is inside of this kind of drum here, you've got an electromagnet, and the raising and lowering of that magnet, kind of like a pendulum almost, it moves this little bracket here. It goes up, and there's a rotating drum in there with notches on it. That'll rotate, and it contacts these different, almost kind of like fingers, these little pieces of metal, these metal contacts in there, and that's what changes the directions. What you want to do is, if you find your engine is having issues switching from forward to reverse to neutral, you want to make sure that this unit is functioning properly. Make sure that it cycles from forward to neutral to reverse, and if it doesn't, you might need to work on cleaning up the contacts, cleaning up the unit drum, making sure that the actual little plastic pieces that kind of allow the unit drum to rotate aren't broken. I've had that issue before on a locomotive. And also make sure that the actual electromagnet is working by checking all the wiring and stuff. Because a lot of times if an engine is not running in forward or reverse or neutral, or even not running at all, it could be an issue with the unit. The older line of locomotives like I'm showing here are very simple. I mean, here you've got the motor, and you've got the unit, and then you've got the headlights. That's about all you've got going on. So maintenance on these older engines is going to be very easy. If there's something that goes wrong, there's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to fix it. Now, with a more modern Lionel engine, it's not so simple. I am not experienced with Lionel modern locomotives when it comes to repairing them and stuff, and they have a lot more areas where things can go wrong. There's a lot of different boards, a lot of different kind of circuit stuff, lots of things that can short out or cause issues with the engines. For me, if you've got an issue with a modern Lionel locomotive, you can try to fix it yourself, try to order replacement parts and stuff, but I would recommend probably sending it to someone who knows what they're doing, because with those engines, if you don't know what you're doing, you can damage a lot of expensive equipment, especially if it's a Lionel legacy engine with speakers and smoke systems and sound systems and all these circuit boards and stuff. If you do not know what you're doing, and if you do not wire things properly, you can cause some catastrophic failures with that. So this maintenance kind of tips really apply to everything when it comes to making sure that your motors are clean and stuff. Now, modern Lionel engines that have DC cam motors, you can't really service those motors. It's easier to just replace the whole motor, which I'm not a big fan of, but it's kind of how it goes. But some basic tips that apply to all Lionel engines is make sure the wheels and contacts are clean, make sure that all the gears and everything that kind of moves is lubricated, and make sure that the wiring is all intact, because if there's a broken wire, that's a pretty good chance that might be why you're having an issue. Alright, now let's talk about some of the ways to keep your trains running. The first thing you can do is to just keep your trains well maintained by keeping them lubricated, like I mentioned before. Make sure that anything that moves has got some grease or oil. Not too heavy, but just keep them up in good shape. Make sure nothing gets worn out, because over time stuff will get worn out, and when it does, you can replace it. That's another way to keep things going good, is anything that seems damaged or worn out, you can replace. Wheels especially, and brushes, stuff like that over time might eventually have to get replaced. And if an engine doesn't want to run, don't force it to. Don't just keep applying power to it, because if anything, you're just going to burn out your motors. You're not really going to fix anything by just applying more power. If you notice something wrong, do what you can to fix it. A lot of times a small issue, like a little bit of rust on something, might spread into a larger issue. Talking about kind of rust and corrosion, if you do keep your trains in a basement, it's good to, like I do, keep stuff around to prevent moisture from the air settling on your stuff, because it will get corroded and rusty if you let it sit for too long. Just be aware kind of your surroundings or where your trains are. Make sure that they're not in a damp place, and if you are in a basement, be aware of like where your water heater is. Make sure, because it's not uncommon for those to kind of give out, and you get a ton of water on the ground. So if you keep your trains on a shelf, make sure they're not too low to the ground, or else they might end up in a bunch of water. But other than that, that's really about it. Don't drop your trains. Pretty much that's about it. If you do treat these locomotives right, they'll run forever. I mean, I've had some of these engines for a long time, never given me issues. I've got a Lionel 2025 on my shelf from 1947, and it's still one of the best running engines I have. But really, if you keep these trains running good, they'll run forever. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, please consider giving it a like or leaving a comment. And if you want to see more stuff like this and watch other train videos, check out my YouTube channel and subscribe for future videos. Thanks.